Again, another project in Lentor area. There's so many projects there. Next time, will I be able to sell? Everyone is talking about the same thing, oversupply. Well, there's really actually a lot of units in Lentor cluster. So the conclusion seems obvious, right? Too much supply equals to bad investment. But what if I were to tell you that's exactly when you're looking at it wrong? Today, we're going to actually break down the Lentor Garden residences and talk about the oversupply, the exit timeline, the safe entry price, the pricing strategy by the developer, rental versus capital, and overall layout recommendations. Let's dive in. So I'm actually going to address this very big concern that most of my customers or buyers actually have, which is the oversupply. So if you actually look over here, there's actually a big number, or in fact a huge number of supply, which is actually 2,954 units right now. And with the latest GLS as well as the 2 more plots of land, potentially we'll be looking at about 4,000 units in Lentor cluster. That is really a large number of units. So most buyers will be thinking, there's actually so many units in Lentor cluster. So next time when I want to sell, will there be a lot of competition? End of the day, I want to ask you, if let's say you actually have a lot of number of units like 4,000 there, but there is nobody that's actually selling, does supply really still matter? Maybe not. So let me actually touch on the changes in seller stamp duty from 3 to 4 years. So you can see over here, all the 6 projects that were launched before Lentor Gardens were actually having a seller stamp duty of 3 years. This means that even the last one, which is Lentor Central, will be actually able to sell in 2027. And because of the latest changes in our seller stamp duty, right now for any project that is actually launched like Lentor Garden, the SSD is actually 4 years. And by the time Lentor Garden Residences seller stamp duty is over, it's about 2030. That's actually a good 2 years difference. So which means by the time Lentor Garden owners are able to sell, they are actually selling it at 2030, which is actually a difference of 2 years apart. Which means that a lot of the owners would probably has already sold their units. And during TOP, right, for those who actually bought the 6 plots of project before, during TOP, they usually buy for investment. Can I say they usually will sell it at a very decent and reasonable prices, and usually they sell it a bit faster. So those leftover units are what? Usually the leftover units are those units that are actually probably asking a little bit higher. So because of that, we'll have lesser competition, and can I say we will also be able to actually sell it at a higher price because we are the latest kid on block. So the good news is you are actually buying Lentor Gardens but not competing with the earlier 6 plots of projects. So the SSD gap is actually in fact our advantage, because after 2028, most of the units in the first 6 plots has been sold. After that, it will be actually Lentor Gardens, which is 2030. So you can see that those projects that is actually able to sell would more or less have been sold. And the remaining units will probably be actually asking quite high. That's the reason they don't sell. And by the time 2029 or 2030, where Lentor Garden can sell, you will see that you most likely will be competing with a lesser supply. And then another one that you have to just watch out for is our Lentor Central GRS, which they will most likely launch next year. So with a 4 years SSD, very highly they will be only able to sell in 2031 or 2032. That means in around 2030, you only have your Lentor Gardens to actually sell, meaning to say you have very less competition. Next is actually the land cost for Lentor Gardens. A lot of us, or in fact everybody knows, Lentor Garden was actually bid one of the cheapest at 920 PSF. And in fact, this is actually the lowest among the entire Lentor cluster at the moment. So a lot of agents will be telling you that, oh, Lentor Garden can actually buy because it's bidded cheapest. And then of course we have another one that was actually bidded recently at 1278 PSF. So many agents will be telling you that Lentor Garden sure can buy. But like we said before, when the land bid was actually cheaper, does that mean that the developer will actually sell us cheaper? Not necessary. Let me share with you one example of when a land bidder was cheap. It doesn't mean that it will equate to cheap price. So we have here actually Jetscape and Affinity. So we have Jetscape and Affinity both bidded at almost the same time. Jetscape was actually bidded at $791 and Affinity was bidded 835 PSF. So Jetscape actually was bidded cheaper, but look at the PSF that they actually launched. It actually launched at 1,007, whereas Affinity, even though the land bid was more expensive, it was actually launched at a cheaper price. So this actually shows that when the land price is bidded cheap, it doesn't mean that the developer will sell us cheap. So what I'm actually saying is that it's not about the land price, it's also a lot about the developer pricing strategy. Let me share with you how Kingsford pricing strategy has been so that it can actually give us some idea. After knowing that the land cost is cheap, there might be a possibility that the developer will launch cheaper, but not necessary. But very importantly is actually how the developer doing the price strategy. So let's take a look at how Kingsford actually behaved so far. So Kingsford has a tendency to actually increase the prices during the preview or even during the balloting. So it's actually best to buy at the initial phase even if the project is actually undersubscribed. And why is it important to know this? Because if we know the developer pricing strategy, I think we can really use it to our advantage. Let me show you one example. Chuan Park. This is actually a 2-bedroom and it was actually sold at the balloting day, which is on the 10th of November. So the second floor was actually sold at 1.6998 million. Just 2 floors higher on the 4th floor, it was actually sold at 1.84 million. These both are actually sold on the balloting day. This means that the person that actually bought on the second floor immediately saved 140,000. So you can actually see from this example, the developer has a tendency to actually even increase on the balloting day depending on the crowd and the response. So if your queue number is really good and you are able to actually buy at the very first part of the balloting itself, you could potentially save up to 200,000 to 300,000 at the end of the preview. Next is an example of One Marina Gardens, also by the same developer, Kingsford. So you can see on the preview day itself, on the 20th floor, stack 24, it was actually sold at 3.058 million. And right now, it's actually still selling, right? Right now, the developer is actually asking on the 19th floor, it should be actually cheaper because it's actually like 1 floor lower, right? But look at the price it's asking. It's asking 3.179 million. This is actually almost 120,000 more expensive. What does this mean? This means that if you actually buy at the early phase, which is the preview, you can actually get a higher floor, 20th floor, and you actually save 120,000. Next is another 3-bedroom at stack 17, 28th floor. You can see during preview, the 28th floor was actually sold at 3.588 million. Whereas right now on the 6th floor, the developer is actually calling it at 3.727 million. This means that if you are actually able to buy at the balloting day, you are actually able to get a higher floor at a cheaper price of almost 140,000. With these two examples, you can see that the behavior of this developer actually increases the price along the balloting day, just like Chuan Park. They do also increase the price during the whole launch itself. So if we actually know how the developer behaved, we will know that they actually launched low in the beginning stage and they will increase the price along the way. This definitely will add to our advantage when we actually look at Lentor Gardens. Because if you actually know the unit that you're going to buy, for example, 2-bedroom or the 4-bedroom, and you know that this unit type is actually going to be stacked up during the launch, right? And if you were to buy at the initial launch price, I think very likely you could potentially save up to 200,000 to 300,000 profit at the end of the preview day. So now let's take a look at how do we determine a safe entry price. As you can see over here, we actually have a lot of supply, 6 projects, and Lentor Gardens is the number 7. So the developer, when they look at the number of supply over here, right, what do they have? They actually have a very big fear as well, just like the buyers. So you realize that every time when a new launch in Lentor Gardens released, right, surprisingly, all the prices is still actually launching at the previous launch price. This means that you always have a chance to buy the previous initial price. But of course, it will actually increase over the time. And you can see that it starts from low and then actually increase to about 2005. Lentor as well start low but increase to about 2006. So this actually tells us that the developer do have a fear, and every time when they actually launch, they will launch it at a very low initial price. Looking at Lentor Garden Residences is actually bid at one of the cheapest at 920. This means that the developer really has actually a edge over the rest. And they also do know that this is the 7th plot. So definitely the buyers will have a fear whether it's oversupply. The developer will definitely be able to guess it or see as well. So with such, right, can I say the developer will also adopt the same pricing strategy that the 6th plot has done, which is actually to launch it very attractive. So looking at that, right, I would say very highly they probably might start with 2001 PSF. But what is the price that they can actually go for? Let's look at the price that has already been transacted. You can see most of them has already end off about 2005. So if let's say Lentor Gardens were to start at 2001 and actually probably until 2005 PSF, can I say it's still actually a very safe price? And not forgetting our Lentor Central GLS, which was bidded 1278 PSF. That's actually almost 40% higher. So what is the price that Lentor Central GLS have to launch? If we actually look at the land bid price for Lentor Central GLS and the break-even of almost 2004, we can more or less predict that they will most likely launch it at 2007-2008. If let's say Lentor Central GLS is going to launch 2007, where do you think they will actually end off? Can I say maybe even 3,000? So with that in mind, if you are actually the developer for Lentor Gardens, do you think if you were actually to launch it at 2001 to even 2005 or even 2007, it is actually still a very safe entry price for the buyers? In fact, this is actually our sweet spot. Why do I say so? Because first of all, you can always compare to make sure that you are buying at a very safe price because you have the 6 plots before that. So you can see if you're entering at 2122, is this actually a safe price? Secondly, if you were to buy Lentor Gardens, you're actually in the middle range because you'll be buying probably 21 to 25, which is actually still in the middle of all those that has already been transacted. So you have prices that has been transacted to let you know that you are actually very safe to purchase it at about 21 to 22. Or even at the end of the launch, if you were to purchase it at 24, 25, and looking at the pricing behavior of this developer Kingsford, they do actually increase the price along the way. I think it's actually still pretty safe to enter at 24, 25 because we actually know the future price that is going to launch highly at 2007. And lastly, you'll be able to actually exit in 2030 where there not be many supply in the market because all the 6 plots will have already more or less sold. And your next biggest competition is actually Lentor Central GLS, which is only able to sell in 2031. So with all this, right, do you actually agree now that you're actually entering at a very safe entry price with very limited supply when the time you want to sell? So should we actually make use of this advantage? Next, let's address the concern that most buyers have, which is the rental yield versus the profit. A lot of customers will be like, okay, I do see it, but what about the rental yield? What about the rental yield in Lentor? It doesn't seem to be actually very high, or in fact, it looks low. So let me ask you a very direct question. Are you buying a property more on rental yield or capital appreciation? Because it's actually almost not possible to have both of them at the same time. Let me share with you what I mean by this. So over here, we actually have 2 examples, which is actually Uptown and Affinity. As you can see, Uptown, right, this is actually in RCR, fantastic location, which is about 2 minutes walk to the MRT. And then we have Affinity, which is actually about 26 minutes to the MRT. So if you look at this, can I say straight away you do know that Uptown should have a higher rental yield. So let's take a look at how they actually perform. If let's say back then in 2021 and you have actually a budget of 1.4 to 1.5, you could get actually a 3-bedroom in Affinity, also a 3-bedroom compact in Uptown. In Affinity, when it was actually bought in 2021, it was bought in 1.413 million versus Uptown about 1.5 million. You can see over here, Affinity, the rental was not fantastic because it's a bit away from the MRT, right? So the rental was about 4,002 and it's actually renting about 3.5% rental yield only. Versus Uptown, very near to the MRT, super convenient. It is actually renting out at 5,003, very good rental at 4.2%. But what happens when they actually sell? Affinity sold in 2026, it actually sold at 1.8 million and the profit is actually about 366,000, which is 4.75%. Whereas Uptown also sell about the same year 2026 and they actually sold at 1.64 million. That's only about 130,000 profit at 1.83%. This means that if you actually want to look for high rental yield, you would actually look at Uptown because it gives you 4.2%. But in terms of the profit, it actually is not as good as Affinity. So the question that you have to actually pose is, if you were to actually buy a property in Lentor Garden, are you more concerned about the rental yield or are you more concerned about the profit? Another example I can share with you is actually Riverfront Residences versus One Pearl Bank. So where is Riverfront Residences? Riverfront Residences is actually over here, which is almost about 15 minutes walk to the MRT. And then compared to One Pearl Bank, as we all know, One Pearl Bank is a beautiful project. It's actually just like minutes walk to the MRT and they have 3 different lines. Without much saying, you can see straight away One Pearl Bank definitely has a better rental yield, right? But what about the profit? Since the rental yield is so good, the profit profit shouldn't be that bad, right? But let's take a look at the difference. So back then in 2019, if let's say you have a budget of 1.4 to 1.5, you could actually buy a 3-bedroom in Riverfront at 1.442. You can also buy a 2-bedroom in one per bank at 1.536 million. And like I said, Riverfront is not so near to the MRT, so the rental yield over there is about 5,000 per month at 3%. Versus one per bank, super convenient, very near to the MRT, is able to rent about 5,500. The rental yield is at 4.2%. But when you actually sell, let's look at how Riverfront actually performed. When they actually sell in 2025, both same year, Riverfront is able to sell at 2.13 million at a profit of 689,000, almost 7% profit returns. Whereas one per bank actually sold at only 1.638 million and make only about 100,000. The profit that they actually make is actually only about 1.1%. So if you actually look at this, right, you can definitely see that if you actually want a higher rental yield, you will be looking at an area that is very near to the MRT, that's super easy to rent. But in terms of the profit, it will not be able to actually get a higher profit such as Riverfront. So the question that you actually have to ask yourself is that if you were to buy Lentor Garden, are you actually more concerned about rental yield or are you actually more concerned about profit? Because it's actually almost impossible to get both. And coming back to Lentor Gardens, as we know, Lentor Gardens area is actually mainly for people buying for own stay. So when it's actually more for own stay, right, definitely the rental yield will not be so attractive because most of the people buy for own stay because of the school and amenities. So high chance they will actually stay for a long time. And because of that, a lot of people will also want to buy it for own stay. With the own stay purpose in mind, definitely the capital appreciation will be much higher than the rental yield. Finally, I'm going into the project information. I will not delve too much about it because I believe a lot of y'all can find information online. So I'm just going to touch quickly about the project information, the location as well as the layouts. So Lentor Gardens is actually located over here. This is actually the number 7 plot of land in Lentor cluster. And in fact, if you actually see from the map here, it actually has the best views in Lentor looking at the hill or the next projects, which is actually a lower plot ratio at 1.4%. Some information about Lentor Gardens, we actually have 499 units and we actually have 3 shops that's actually open for sales. Something just to highlight is that we have actually 1 early childcare development center in our development itself and 3 cluster house, which is also very rare in Lentor cluster. So this is actually the artist's impression. We basically have 3 blocks. 2 blocks are actually a highest level of 16th floor and 1 block at 8 levels. And something to actually highlight as well, in fact, Lentor Gardens, right, has actually one of the largest pool in the whole Lentor cluster. The pool is estimated to be about 200 meters. And this is actually the site plan, so most of the units are actually pool facing or facing the park or facing the future plot, which is actually at 1.4 plot ratio. So why is Lentor Gardens different? Like I said before, it actually have 3 shops, 3 strata houses, and most importantly, it actually is sitting on the biggest plot of land over there at 222,000 square feet. And one important thing to highlight is that for Lentor Gardens, it's not using PPVC. This means that the internal wall can be hacked. So for families who want to renovate and combine the rooms, this is definitely a massive selling point in the resale market later. Next, let's look at the units mix. Over here, as we mentioned, Lentor Gardens is mainly for own stay, right? So we do not have any 2-bedroom, 1 bath. It all starts from 2-bedroom, 2 bath. And a big part is actually our 2-bedroom at more than 50% and 3 bedrooms at about 27%. So this is our 2-bedroom premium layout. Basically, we only have 646 and 678. And they are all dumbbell layout. So you can see over here for the 646 square feet is actually a open concept kitchen. And the dining area is actually a little bit smaller versus the 678. It has a more closable kitchen and the dining area here is more sizable. So usually for investment purpose, we will actually usually advise you to buy a smaller unit because renter doesn't pay you more when you actually get a bigger size. But since we already know that for Lentor Gardens, right, most of the buyers or people that come in here is more for own stay. And if it's actually for own stay, can I say they would prefer to probably have a more tucked-in kitchen or closable kitchen and a proper dining area. Because of this reason, I will advise you to avoid 646 square feet layout. And one more layout is actually our 2-bedroom with a bomb shelter, which is actually 689 square feet. You can see over here, this is actually a dumbbell as well. However, it has a proper dining area. On top of that, right, it actually has a home shelter, which is really very good for people staying in Lentor area. They are mainly for people for own stay, and they definitely need an extra storage space. And this kitchen is also more or less closable. So with that, right, definitely my top choice will be actually this 2-bedroom premium with a bomb shelter, 689 square feet. Because it's very, very rare to have a bomb shelter or what we call a storage space for a 2-bedroom in Lentor area. And on top of that, you can see that the price difference is most likely not going to be a lot. Because the size of 689 versus 678, the difference is probably less than 30,000, but you get an additional bomb shelter for storage. So my pick definitely will be actually the 2-bedroom with bomb shelter. Let's look at 2-bedroom premium plus study. They're all 732 square feet. So you can see for the S1 and S2, right, they're actually the same layout, just a mirror image. And the study area seems to be a little bit small as compared to S3 and S4. So S3 and S4 is the same size, 732 as well, but you can see that the study area here, right, I would say is actually much more efficient. You can really use this study as a storage area, or you can use this as a study to actually be away from people watching TV or eating. And you can see that S3 and S4, the dining area is slightly bigger than S1 and S2. The dining area is not really facing the toilet directly, whereas for S1 and S2, they are facing the toilet quite directly, or almost opposite. And then we have S5 and S6. So what is actually the difference? If you actually look at it, I would say it's actually almost the same. Something to highlight again is that you actually have a proper study area in S5, and your dining area is actually very proper. Whereas S6, right, you can see the study is actually a little bit smaller, and the dining area is a little bit smaller, segregated away from the kitchen. So if you ask me, right, my top choice would definitely be S5. First of all, you actually have a bigger study area. You have a very proper dining area. And over here, right, you can see that your kitchen seems to be a bit bigger area versus this area here. Because here, you have a kitchen and then you have a study, then the dining is here. It's a little bit segregated away. Whereas this is actually a much more proper kitchen and a proper dining area. And then the study is actually tucked at the corner. So my top choice would definitely be this S5. Next is the 3-bedroom layouts. We have actually the compact 872 and 936 square feet. So the 872 square feet, you can see that not bad. It actually has a little foyer before you actually enter. And it actually have a dry and a wet kitchen as well. And the good thing about this unit is that it actually has window for the toilets as well as the kitchen, which is pretty good. Versus 936. 936 is actually also having a foyer, a dry kitchen, and most importantly, it actually has a very proper study area. So this study area is really very good. It can actually act as a helper room, or it can actually be a piano room or an extra study room for the kids. And if you actually look at the dining area, you will realize that this is actually a more proper dining area that you can sit comfortably 6 people. Whereas over here, right, is a bit tight. Because if you actually were to sit 2 rows here, right, you realize that the chair might actually bump into someone that is trying to walk into the kitchen. Or over here, you might just bump into someone that's trying to walk along the walkway. So definitely 936, I think this dining area will be much more better. And considering a 3-bedroom here is mainly for own stay, so I believe a dining area or a place where they actually entertain their friends will definitely be much more appreciated. So you can see over here, 936 versus 872, right? What you're actually paying is probably about maybe additional 140,000 more only, but you get a very proper, bigger dining area, and you actually get a study area. So if you were to actually resale next time, I think the family that come and view your unit will definitely appreciate the extra study as well as a proper dining area. Next is actually our 3-bedroom premium plus study, which is 969 square feet. It's actually a dumbbell layout, which is actually a bit rare for a 3-bedroom to be a dumbbell layout. And most importantly, right, you have to take note is that they do not actually have windows at the bathroom as well as the kitchen. So it is really not very probably advisable because there's no window in this area. Very likely, these two layout will actually probably be a bit more expensive. Why? Because they're actually situated at the block which is actually lower floor as well as facing the future plot. This block, as you can see, actually has lesser units. This means that it probably has more privacy. So high chance there might be a bit of a loading here. So if let's say you were to actually look at this stack or these units, right, you really have to see how the developer price it. If it's actually priced it a little bit more with the premium, then my advice is probably try to avoid this layout. Next, we actually go into our 3-bedroom premium 1001 square feet. This is actually almost the same, very traditional layout, but the difference is over here where you can see P4, right? You actually have a bigger area here to do a little bit more on the storage for your shoes cabinet. And on top of that, right, it actually has windows in your bathroom as well as your kitchen. And for this layout, right, it actually has almost everything because it actually has a yard, it has a home shelter which is suitable for the helpers, as well as a WC. Next is actually P5, which is 1012 versus the other P6. Difference is only what we call the foyer area. For 1012 is actually a little bit more on the walk area, whereas 1001 square feet has a foyer over here again. So if you actually ask me, right, my top preference will actually be our P4 because over here you can actually do additional storage for your shoe cabinet. It has a yard, it has a WC, and it has windows at all the toilets and kitchen. Definitely, I think this one would definitely appeal more to family in the future resale market. Next, we look at the 4-bedroom compact. So the 4-bedroom compact has two layouts, C1 and C2, both at 1184 square feet. If you look at it closely, the only difference is actually over here, the walkway, versus in C2, there's actually a little foyer over here. And the good thing about our 4-bedroom compact is that it even has a walk-in wardrobe. Lastly is our 4-bedroom premium. Over here is 1356 and 1346 square feet. Both of them actually have the junior ensuite. The main difference is actually over here where the P1 actually has a foyer and the P2 actually has a foyer but a longer foyer area. So this area is really quite good because you can actually do more shoe cabinets for storage. So if you look at these two layouts, my preference will be actually the P2 layout because you actually will be paying a bit lesser, but you got a bit more storage for shoe cabinets. Excellent for homeowner stay. If you're buying more for investment purpose, I would recommend the smaller 4-bedroom C2 because if you actually to look at it, the size 1184, right, versus the bigger size of 1356, the quantum could easily be about 300,000 more just for the junior ensuite bathroom lah. At the end of the day, it really depends on your queue during the balloting day. If by the time you're actually able to choose and you're only left with high floor for a 1184 compact versus you can still get a low floor for a 4-bedroom premium and you probably only top up a little bit more like 100,000, definitely you should actually look at the 4-bedroom premium because it actually gives you a junior ensuite. If you're considering Lentor Garden or want to compare with the resale options around you, feel free to contact me or scan the QR code below. Let's sit down for a 15 minutes coffee chat and map out your exact entry and exit strategy. Don't buy based on fear or hype, buy based on numbers. Thank you for staying with me till now, and if you could kindly click subscribe and share this video, this will really mean a lot to me. Once again, I'm Christine and see you soon.